Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Stochastic Agency here on August 8th, 2022 for RPG A Day. Now, I know today's question is all about who introduced you to RPGs. Now, unfortunately, I kind of wrapped that up when we talked about when I got introduced to RPGs. So it was my brother's girlfriend's brother who I got dumped on who introduced me to RPGs. But that's not a really great video for a day like today. So what I want to do is I want to go back and talk about recommending a game. Now, this isn't going to really be a review, although I'll probably take a closer look at reviewing the game later on, but it's definitely a game that I want to talk about. So the game is called Spectaculars. It's by Rodney Thompson of Scratchpad Publishing. Roughly, it was kickstarted about 4 years ago, if I remember correctly. And it comes as a complete game. It comes as a box set. Box is about yay big. Okay. And it's got all the dice, all the tokens, all the cards, all the books that you need, all the character sheets, and plenty of scenarios. Now, this company, Scratchpad Publishing, also produced a game called Dust City Outlaws, but it's more of a fantasy event, and I haven't picked up that game yet. Now, both games are still relatively available. I just recently went to go look at their website because I was thinking about getting Dust City Outlaws, and I see that they still sell them directly. I noticed that I originally had gotten my Spectaculars game off of Amazon, but unfortunately, I do not see them on there anymore. I do believe there's a couple of online stores, so you could just Google search for shopping for Spectaculars role-playing game or Dusk City Outlaws. So as I said, it comes with the rule book, which basically explains essentially what you could call, or I guess what is called really, the D100 AC dice system. Now, why D100 AC? The entire game is based off percentiles. It's very straightforward. A lot of games are based off percentiles, so that's something that's very easy to teach. It's a roll under system. So whatever percentile you're trying to roll, you need to roll under that number on a D100. But what's the AC mean? AC stands for advantage and challenge. So while you're playing, the players are really going to have to narrate a lot because you only get advantage dice when you, the player, are actively participating. The DM or the editor can issue challenge dice. A challenge dice and advantage dice cancel each other out. Depending on how much of one or another you have, it has various different effects during gameplay. So the setting book and the rules in general. I'll talk about the rules a little bit. The one thing that really ties this game together as far as what it means to play a game about superheroes is that this isn't playing Marvel. This isn't playing DC or Dark Horse or whatever comic book, and I want to emphasize that, whatever comic book company you may be a fan of. Really what this is you, as all the players in the game, are essentially creating a comic book series. So it's very generic. You could think of yourself sitting down and playing, The Invincibles. It's not part of any particular comic book universe because you're making this universe as you go along. Now, the rule book explains how to make rolls, how to get hero points, what cooldown means for something on a power, and how experience points are awarded. And also how the reputation system kind of works out, because this game does use reputation, and the game does expect you to play a hero, not a villain, not necessarily a dark hero, but when it comes to the media, the public, and the government, depending on what your characters do during a series or for a particular issue, and that's one of the things you'll hear a lot, is that it uses comic book terms. So depending on what you do during the game, it can affect those scores, and those scores have a positive or negative impact on how the game and your series continues. So the rule book contains everything about rolling dice, advancing, and all your general stuff. Really, the rule book, and they're odd sizes. I do think you can get PDFs though. They're odd sizes. The rule book really is not that big. If we are going to include all of the pages, let's say 59 pages. So a 59-page book, most of that also includes descriptions as far as what it means to run an interlude scene, what it means to customize your campaign, creating your own issues. The actual rule book section itself, which covers the rules, and everything is color-coded. The actual rules section is only 22 pages. Really a pretty quick read. Probably one of the best parts about the game is the setting book. The setting book contains all the information that you are going to be writing down, and kind of see here. And like I said, this is just going to be kind of a brief overview. I'll do a little bit more of a review on this later. But here was our first series. So this is the information we took down about the basics of where our comic book series takes place. And you do this for pretty much every episode or every issue. Each time you use a scenario, it's basically like you're issuing a comic book. This is the action that takes place both at the table and in the comic book that you're quote unquote writing, more or less. Now, this isn't really a writer. It is somewhat of a writer's room game, but not 100%, where you're just sitting back and you're just doling out information and taking notes and writing stuff down. There are still combat scenes, investigation scenes, or interludes, and various different aspects that you can use to help build your character, and most importantly, gain or get back hero points. Now, I said, one of the things that it comes with is the dice. The dice are pretty easy. Black dice, white dice. White dice are advantage, black dice are challenge dice. A whole bunch of percentile dice, enough for at least 7 players to sit down and play. Power cards, they're all divided up by genre because each of the various scratch pads or series pads comes in a different flavor. Eldritch Mysteries is more about sorcery and the occult. Explorers of the Unknown is kind of like super science and Silver Age exploration. Streetlight Knights is all about street level heroes and defending neighborhoods from crime and villainy. Clash Among the Stars is about galaxy spanning stories of interstellar war and planet devouring titans. So a lot goes on, and you have crossovers. The one thing to kind of keep in mind when going through, and if you do pick up the game, is that it is very much like a comic book. So the kind of things that happen in comic books happen at the table. It uses comic book language to describe how things occur and the events that happen. It uses the same kind of tropes. It also uses the same kind of mechanism. So there is a retcon. There is a death but not dead. There is return to activity. There is a flipping over to villainy, that kind of thing, changing of colors. One of the things that may throw a lot of people off about playing the game is the use of cards, especially when it comes to initiative. There are power cards, and as I said, they relate to the type of genre or the type of series that you're playing through. There are cards that you pull based on the type of series that you're playing that gives you an identity, and that identity has various skills, and the skills are very generic. There are no in-depth descriptions of what the skills are. There's also team role cards. The team role refers to things like support, leadership, infiltrator, tank, and things like that. Now, these relate to initiative. Initiative in the game is done every turn through the use of a deck of cards. And that's because in your scenario, there's going to be various different aspects for each major encounter or minor encounter that you have. And each aspect of that encounter has a specific card. So there may be a major villain, a minor villain, and a bunch of minions. Now, I did make one thing because we did have a scenario where everybody kept rolling additional complications. So I did make this additional minions tracker where we can just write on it with a dry erase marker and kind of keep track. Definitely did not have enough minion cards. But your team rolls, or the cards in the initiative deck that represent your team roll, get shuffled in with complications and the various other non-player characters that are taking part. And they get shuffled each round, and then they're laid face up, left to right, and initiative goes left to right. So it makes the battle very dynamic. Things like the leadership role allow you to change who might be in what initiative order, or who goes first, or if a villain goes after a certain hero. Complication cards also are added in to help you have additional goals. Now, there is a specific deck, if I remember correctly, it's like 52 cards of complications. Now, these are not divided by genre. It is just a deck of cards used to help either literally or figuratively inspire the editor to come up with a complication in a scene when a dice roll is made and a complication arises. Now, one of the things that you might be asking yourself is, how easy is the game to run and set up and play? Well, quite literally. So let's take a look at, real quick, this is the scratch pad. As you can see, it's like a notepad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 6 elements behind the master page. The master page, of course, being double-sided. This you could read within 15 minutes before the game begins. It is literally an outline. And it's kind of a linear story in a sense. Or you can look at it as certain sections are going to take place depending on what happens. Now, each time a new scenario is played, new heroes are introduced. Not a whole bunch, but there's 1 or 2. Then there are pre-generated stats or stat sheets for minions, minor villain, and a major villain. So depending on the style of the story that you're going through, or the scenario, this particular issue of your comic book, things will change dynamically depending on the genre. They're not always going to be the same types of villains. They're not always going to be the same genre of villains. And the powers are definitely going to feel very different. A note on powers. The descriptions of the powers basically fit on a standard playing card. Typically, there's a basic description, and then 1 or 2 stunts that you can pull off, depending on how many hero points you have, or if there's a cooldown, meaning a timer token, a certain number of timer tokens get placed on the card, and as the turns click down, you take those timer tokens off, and then you can perform the stun again. It is definitely not like Marvel superheroes. It is definitely not like the old DC role-playing game, and it is not Champions. A lot of creativity has to go into, 1, describing what a character does, describing what the villains do, describing what the environment's like, describing exactly what the goal of completing a challenge is. Because if for some reason, during an encounter, the heroes do not overcome a complication, they will not gain hero points or experience for that particular complication during that encounter. Overall, the game plays very simply. You can sit down and there's no real digging through a book. There is shuffling of cards. There are drawing of cards, selecting of a certain number of powers, selecting identity, selecting a team role, having your dice in front of you. And that's really about it. The only thing you really need to know is that you've got to act like a hero in a comic book does. You've got to roll under whatever the percentage roll is. If you want to get advantages, you need to narrate positive or cinematic actions that a hero would do in a comic book. Overall, there is plenty of content in this box for you to play a superhero game, probably once a weekend or once every other weekend for at least a year. And for $70, if I think that's roughly what I bought it for on Amazon, then it's pretty easy to do. That's why I would recommend Spectaculars as a good superheroes game. So thank you guys and gals. Take it easy. And if you can, just be good to each other.